Chapter 3. The Adventure of the Shopkeepers. Dick went on with his breakfast. He ate cold pastry, and poached eggs and ham and rolls, and raspberry jam and hot cakes, and he drank 2 cups of coffee. Meanwhile, the king had joined the tradesmen who attended by his orders. They were all met in his royal study, where the king made them a most splendid bow, and requested them to be seated. But they declined to sit in the sacred presence, and the king observed that, in that case, he must stand up. "I've invited you here, gentlemen," he said, "a matter of nearly private importance, and I must request that you be entirely silent as the duties of your nature. It is difficult, I know, not to talk about one's work, but in an instant I am sure you will oblige me." "Your Majesty has only to command," said Herr Schmidt. "There have been monarchs in neighboring kingdoms who would have cut off our heads after we had done a bit of secret business, but the merest word from your Majesty is law to your loyal subjects." The other merchants murmured in assent, for King Prigio was really liked by his people. He was always good-tempered and polite, and never went to war with anybody. He spent most of his royal income on public objects, and of course there were scarcely any taxes to speak of. Moreover, he had abolished what is called compulsory education, making everybody to go to school whether he likes it or not, a most mischievous and tyrannical measure. "A fellow who can't teach himself to read," said the king, "is not worth teaching." For all these reasons, and because they were fond of the queen, the subjects were ready to do anything in reason for King Prigio. Only one tradesman, bowing very deep and blushing very much, said, "Majesty, you will hear me for a moment?" "Oh, for an hour, with pleasure, Herr Schmidt," said the monarch. "It is a tradesman-like and unusual thing to decline an order, and if your Majesty asks for my heart's blood, I am ready to shed it, not to speak of anything in the line for my business, namely boot and shoemaking. But keep a secret from my wife. I fairly own your Majesty that I cannot." Herr Schmidt went down on his knees and wept. "Rise, Herr Schmidt," said the king, taking him by the hand. "More honorable and chivalrous confession of an amiable weakness, if it is even to be called a weakness, I never heard. Sir, you have been true to your honor and to your prince. The face of few men can bear a chance of ridicule. There is no one here, I hope, but respects and will keep the secret of Herr Schmidt's confession." The assembled shopkeepers could scarcely refrain from tears. "Long live King Prigio the Good!" they exclaimed, vowed that everything should be kept dark. "Indeed, sire," said the swordsmaker, "all the rest of us are bachelors." "That is none the worse for my purpose, gentlemen," said his Majesty. "But I trust that you will not long deprive me of sons and worthy subjects and succeed such fathers. And now, if Herr Schmidt will kindly find his way to the buttery where the refreshments are ready, I shall have the pleasure of conducting you to the scene of your labors." Thus speaking, the king, in another magnificent bow, led the way upstairs to a little turret room in a deserted part of the palace. While bidding the tradesmen enter, he showed them a large collection of miscellaneous things: an old cap or two, a pair of boots of a sort of long out of fashion, an old broadsword, a shabby old Persian rug, an ivory spyglass, and other articles. These were, in fact, the fairy presents which had been given to the king at his christening, and by aid of which, and his natural acuteness, he had in his youth succeeded in many remarkable adventures. The caps were the wishing cap and the cap of darkness. The rug was a famous carpet which carried its owner through the air wherever he wished to go. The sword was a sword of sharpness. The ivory glass showed you anyone you wanted to see, however how far off. The boots were the 7-league boots, which Hop o' My Thumb stole from the ogre about 1697. There were other valuable objects, but these were the most useful and celebrated. Of course, the king did not tell the tradesmen what they were. "Now, gentlemen," he said, "you see these old things, for a reason which I must ask you to excuse me for keeping to myself. I wish you to provide me with objects precisely similar to these, with all the look of age." The tradesmen examined the objects, each choosing that of his own line of business. "There's a sword, sire," said the cutler. It is an Ferris, a final blade. By a lucky accident, I happen to have one at home. It's a small collection of ancient weapons exactly like it. This evening it shall be at your Majesty's disposal. Perhaps, Schlitzer, you will kindly write an order for it, as I wish no one of you to leave this palace, if you can conveniently stay till your business is finished. Oh, with pleasure, your Majesty, said the cutler. As to the old rug, said the upholsterer, I have a Persian one quite identical to it at home, at your Majesty's service. Then can you do like Herr Schmidt, who was the cutler? And I, said the hatter, have two old caps just like these, part of my bankrupt theatrical stock. Yeah, most fortunate, said the king. The boots, now I come to think, are unimportant, at least at the time present. Perhaps you can borrow a pair from the theatre. As for the glass, said the optician, if your Majesty will allow me to take it home with me, I'm afraid I cannot part with it, said the king. But that, too, is unimportant, or not very pressing. Then he called for a servant to order luncheon for the shopkeepers, and paper for them to write their orders on. But no one was within hearing, and in the very old part of the palace there were no bells. Just pardon me for an instant while I run downstairs, said His Majesty, and it seems a strange thing to act, but may I advise you not to sit down on the carpet? I have a reason for it. In fact, he was afraid that someone might sit down on it and wish himself somewhere to be carried off, as was the nature of the carpet. King Prigio was not absent a minute, for he met William on the stairs, but when he came back, there was not a single person in the turret room. Where on earth are they? Cried the king, rushing through the rooms part of the castle. He shouted for them and looked everywhere, but there was not a trace of the tailor, hatter, optician, sword-maker, or upholsterer. The king hastened to the window under the gate, and saw the sentinels on duty. "Hey!" he called. The sentinels turned around and looked up and saluted. "Have you seen anyone go out?" he cried. "Not one, sire," answered the soldiers. The king, who began to guess what had happened, hurried back to the turret room. There were all the tradesmen with parcels under their arms. "What means this, gentlemen?" said His Majesty severely. "For what reason did you leave the room without my permission?" They all knelt down, humbly imploring his compassion. "Oh, get up, you donkeys," said the king, forgetting his politeness. "Get up and tell me where you've been hiding yourselves." The hatter came forward and said, "Sire, you will not believe me. Indeed, I can scarcely believe it myself." "Well, none of us can't," said the sword-maker. "We have been home and brought the articles, and all orders executed in punctuality and dispatch," he added, quoting his own advertisement, without thinking it. On this the sword-maker took out and examined the Andrea Ferrara blade, which was exactly like a sword of sharpness. The upholsterer undid his parcel, where there was a Persian rug, which no one could tell from the magical carpet. The hatter was fumbling with the string of his parcel, and he suddenly remembered that the king, in his astonishment, had not noticed that he had put the cap on himself. He pulled it off in a hurry, and the king saw at once that it was his wishing cap, and understood all about the affair. The hatter, in his absence, had tried the wishing cap on, and had wished himself and his friends well at home and back again, with their wares at the palace. And what he wished happened, of course, as was natural. The moment the king saw how much talk this business would produce in the country, and he decided on the best way to stop it. Seizing the wishing cap, he put it on, wished that all the tradesmen, including the shoemaker, back in town at their shops, and also wished that none of them should remember anything about the whole affair. In a moment he was alone in the turret room. As for the shopkeepers, they had a kind of idea that they had dreamt something odd, but as it went no further, of course they did not talk about it, and nobody was any the wiser. "How that I am," said King Prigio to himself. "I might have better wished for a complete set of sham fairy things most like in the work. I should have saved a great deal of trouble, but I'm so much out of the habit of using the cap that I never thought of it. However, what I have got will do very well." Then, putting on the cap of darkness that nobody might see him, he carried all the real fairy articles away, except the 7-league boots, to his own room, where he locked them up, leaving in their place the sham wishing cap, the sham cap of darkness, the sham sword of sharpness, the carpet which was not a magic carpet at all. His idea was, of course, that Ricardo would start on his expedition, fighting in his fairy things. He would find that they did not act. Then he would be left to his own cleverness and courage to get him out of the scrape. That would teach him, thought the king, to depend on himself, and to set a proper value on cleverness and learning, minding his books. Or he might have locked the things up and forbidden Ricardo to touch them, but that might have seemed too harsh. And, as you may easily imagine, with all the powers at his command, the king fancied he could easily rescue Ricardo from any serious danger at the hands of giants, magicians, or monsters. He only wanted to give him a fright or two, and make him respect the judgment of older, wiser people than himself.